Good afternoon, one and all. I welcome everyone to this final program, which is being led by NSC Theophilos in collaboration with NSC Cultural Landscape, NSC Education and Training, NSC LAFI with South Zone. The program is titled New Paradigm Management for Conservation Education and Real Ground Actions Towards Sustainability. We have commenced viewing the period comprising the next 50 years of the World Heritage Convention 72. The event is visualized as a roundtable discussion that attempts to articulate the dimensions of operationalization, that is, from theory to action through education with equal rights to all. It is believed that this method has great relevance for conservation education and profession. ICOMOS members with considerable teaching and professional experience will present on select educational themes that can inform and reinforce conservation education. It is expected that the approach taken may broaden and link subjects that will lead to interdisciplinary methods in the new curriculum. To open today's series of discussion, I would request Madam Rima Hooja to call the session open, and I would like to take a moment to introduce Madam Rima Hooja to our audience. Madam Rima is an archaeologist, historian, teacher, and author with a PhD from Cambridge University and over 40 years teaching and research experience. She spent her childhood in Rajasthan, and she has grown up with a wide exposure and understanding of rural areas, monuments, museum, archaeological sites, brick kilns, handloom glass factories, folk stories, traditions, and she has served as the vice president during the COVID lockdown period, and her vast experience, in the field of this subject and her contribution to ICOMOS body, we are very glad that ma'am is here to call this very important series of discussion open. Ma'am, I welcome you to call the proceedings open.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is always a pleasure to be interacting with one's colleagues. And I will keep my this formal opening a little short, but I hope to be able to say more later on. And I want to open with an anecdote with something which has just happened a few minutes ago. Somebody came into my room, somebody who works in this museum where I am, which is the City Palace, Jaipur, formerly the Maharaja Savai Man Singh's second museum, City Palace, Jaipur. And he is not formally literate. So he appreciates what is around him, but in his case, he does not have the formal literacy to read up other material. Very often, the people that all of us are dealing with are formally literate. Yes, we do come across people who may not have numeracy in the same way, the formal way, but they are able to get by. And with them, we might have a different challenge of getting a wider number of people interested in what conservation, what heritage, where education can play its role in honing our skills as researchers, in honing our skills or opening our horizons to a larger body of acolytes that we can bring into the fold of heritage, and in widening the base of people who need to know that it might be too late, even as they get around to appreciating the difference between something that has been crafted and 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 50 years ago, but is worthy of appreciation. It might disappear even in that time frame. So one is personal journeys have shaped us, but personal journeys are no longer enough when we have to start formulating, formalizing, theorizing, and having end products that we can work towards. We do react to what is around us, But even that reaction needs to be more focused. So I'm sure as we go along today with this roundtable, we will be able to come up with action plans, short term, long term, medium, short term, whatever our terminology can be. The issue still left with us is how do we continue to widen our base at a point in time where whatever has happened to Indian aesthetics, it certainly needs to be jogged back into a state of awareness. Instead of being in the state of complacence, into being in a state where we might be reacting to something being destroyed, to having an idealistic situation of a situation where there is proactive issues that we can deal with also. I would like to stop here and stay online to listen to the others. And I would definitely like to, I'm in no position to extend a welcome per se, because we are all part and parcel of one body. But formally say, as always, it's such a pleasure to be with colleagues. Back to you, Monalisa, and over to the next speaker. Thank you for having me once again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rima ma'am. Thank you
Rima.
so
It was
much.
really nice to have you here.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Nalini ma'am, are you ready with the presentation?
No, I don't have a presentation. I'm just going to read.
Okay.
Actually, this is something, Vishakha told me, like we should be just talking also, which is also something very good in its own. It also is very important. And, so she suggested, but I didn't take it up that time. But I think it's a good idea,
Right, ma'am. Right. So, to our audience, I would take the opportunity to introduce Professor Nalini Thakur. Professor Nalini. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Professor Nalini is the former Dean of Studies and Head of the Department of Architectural Conservation at the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, and is now retired. She joined SPA in 1977 to work on an exhibition on Imperial Delhi to research, and then as an associate in the institutional research project Devi Seth, Andhra Pradesh. Madam has been a full-time faculty at SPA and the first in the Department of Architecture, later from 1989 in Architectural Conservation. She was also the first Charles Wallace Scholar from India to be sent to University of York to do a specialization in architectural conservation. Madam has contributed greatly to the domains of architectural education, activism, and protection of World Heritage Sites. Today, Madam will be talking about reflecting the paradox, learning challenges encountered in 2022-23 and futures. Over to you, Madam.
Thank you. Thank you, Mona. So today, I changed my subject. It's a little different. So it's reflecting the paradox. That's what it is called. And, I don't, last year's conservation plan program all the programs that we had conducted by this group, that is Theophilos and many of the, NSCs together, brought out the complexity of the subject and challenges posed in research and study to build adequate and required knowledge base, and also understand, come to know how to analyze the same. We found out it was quite different from the so-called, the way of doing things, because there are a lot of things that we have which were quite different, which came from our context. It also evidenced the limitations in the existing management revealed in the discourse that we had on potential World Heritage Sites in the Northeast. We had one program on the Northeast just to look for World Heritage Sites. And I think it still doesn't have all the states together, all the communities together, so that, it is their heritage. So we haven't really, instead, it's also not very normal. It is very clear that the diversity in the states of the Northeast calls, we have to consider that. The 2 sessions on Marjorie nomination were very well attended. The enthusiasm and concern shown by all of us who were who loved Marjorie were there, but also and the total chaos in the prevailing system and the unmanageable management context that it had even today. Because during the session, even we came to know by the state government rep that a new nomination has already been sent to UNESCO, and it was as a natural site. So I really don't know how fake this is, how true it is, what it is, but it was a big shock for all of us, because this is certainly not the way management is supposed to be done. It's absolutely chaotic. So so from the above, it is clear that something new, absolutely new, relevant and transformational has to be done. And that is what I call, this whole thing, new management, new education. And it is actually part of my theory already, which has been there from before. But the above was to recognize, whatever the programs that we had last year was to recognize and respect the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention. And now from now on, we are going to focus on the next 50 years of the convention and really see how India can learn how to manage all the complex heritage resources and sites that she has in the best possible way. I think that is an exercise that we should be thinking about. And as ICOMOS India, I think it's a good exercise for us to think about. And because most of the professionals in this subject are within ICOMOS. Okay, so that is why I think the focus now will be for the next 50 years. And hence the need, we need a new paradigm. That is what my description of last year's experience tells us, that can know how to handle, and it lies in new management and new education, and will result in a total paradigm shift. Now I'm going to talk a few points about what I tried to say last time. Last time I talked more about the model that I had, and I showed a slide, you have seen it, and so you must have, might remember it. I have mentioned that this thing about conservation is something quite new. It's really never been done before. We have always been living off resources that are there. We never thought that we will do and contribute and be a professional in that for its future. These are very new thoughts in the world. And that has now come with this 20th century thinking after the wars. And I think that's what is the biggest challenge we have. For that, you need 2 things, for me, according philosophically, theoretically, is called reconceptualization and reintegration. That is the 2 things we have to do, because we can't go along the line of the old. We cannot even take a management on the same line it is going and go on extending it. You cannot do all that. You have to rethink, reconceptualize, and start anew. And that is what is the paradigm I'm talking about. Last time I did show the structure of the syllabus 2002 that I had actually literally populated in my department one summer holidays, when the minister, Mr. Murli Manohar Joshi, had asked us to make a syllabus in the holidays, because he wanted to start a master's program and make it 2 years. So there was no time. So we, like a small group of us, just worked. My research associate, was always with me. And I think Lakshmi's class was working through the holidays, because I made them work through the holidays. And I was doing this thing and collecting everything together and putting it down. So that is called 2002. And here the articulation will show the transformation of the curriculum that we did, that how much transformative it was, the curriculum, and required syllabus, that the curriculum or syllabus required. And with the module we had a first module called Towards the Philosophical Base. How do you handle post-colonialism? I think one of the ways to do it is to really bring in a new philosophical base and the thinking of towards that philosophical base, which is more towards your current, context of being free and being, with your constitution, which is also very, very forward-looking. I think that is what we have to do, and that kind of content should be in the way that sort of builds us to and informs us, and also the ethos that we start building within ourselves. So that is what was the philosophical basis. And I said something, and the new areas introduced, such as called redefinition of heritage, because we were doing monuments. So now you all go, wherever you go, you tell us what all heritage is there. Give us all the heritage, big, small, fat, back, whatever, who is a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian, whatever. And that is something that you should be, and that exercise is called redefining, because you start seeing the whole thing, many more than what you were doing before, which was very convenient not to see most of the things. Okay. And then I had another, subject called architectural knowledge systems. Fine. We say now we are off, we are not decolonizing, we are doing this, but you must have an alternative way of understanding your architecture. We can't do it with the Western thinking of visualness and this and all. It is not possible. So, this was named architectural knowledge systems. And to tell you this idea, I'm still working on it, but it goes on expanding. All these things, what I'm saying, is not something that you can talk in one meeting and get an answer, It goes on. So this is what has been sort of substituted for the way we looked at the architecture of the world around us. And it's got other methods and all that. I might come to it a little bit, because inventory, information system, and and then we reconstruct it. We break it into many parts and rebuild it together. When you do that, your cognizance of that building is much better, and it is all objective work. And then secondary will be what you get from books. But if the first one is your experience, your observation, and what you do in the field study. So it was quite it had a different way altogether. Then I had a subject called total quality management. It is nothing new. It is done, a lot of management people, and I know building engineering people were also doing it. And I know a lot of people in the Delhi University, teachers also were talking about it 20, 30 years ago. The thing about total quality management, especially when you're doing complex subjects or topics where you have many, many kinds of exercises, each exercise is quite long, and then how you have to bring it all together to get the correct answer. And only if you get that, when that happens, you have got it, the total quality. The thing is, if you go wrong once somewhere, you're out. You don't get it. Everything falls like a pack of cards. So that is something you have to understand. And then they had to know what is called management per se. What are the parts of management? So, so these were the new, because we had no sense of management for heritage. That time I'm talking about, when I started teaching, there was no management at all. And it also wasn't, they did not know that heritage was a different kind of management. It was not commercial management. It was not tourism management. It was not building, I don't know what all it was. It all, most of the time, went off to some commercial directions, So I had to bring this course here. And then I had about developing new theories. I think one of the things, we need to know how to develop theories, because, we don't really belong to the Descartesian thinking because of our, where we are from, this, India, South Asia. And we don't have that at all. And I found out even Japan doesn't have it. So just making this kind of theory that Europe managed to do, which was fantastic. It's fantastic. I'm not denying it. And it took them a long way, with that kind of thinking and all the new, inventions that came, and the steam engine, there's that, industrialization, whatever. And now, but today, with this complexity, with our kind, you have to have another way of doing this, So, but that means in that philosophical basis, we should have the ability to make theories and know how to work in that sense, that kind of sense, so that we know what we learn and we know how to put it back into our context, So there's a cyclic way of learning, and through that we bring in new information, etc. Then why are they important? How do they inform sustainable and responsible living heritage management with protection? In the recent past, Theophil with working groups comprising, CL, ICH, Education, LAFI, Northeast Zone, and Southern Zone, put up this whole webinar series. And this program that we are today is the last of this. And brought out a lack. It brought out, which I've already told you a little description of what we right in the beginning. It brought out the lack of protection. That is an issue to this day, which it shouldn't have been. That it is. For example, I would like to give you Nizamuddin Basti. I worked on it in 70s. And when I went to the site, I actually went when I was a first year student also. And when I went to the site, I saw the most outstanding settlement in its completeness at that point. I mean, you just will not believe it, what you saw. The little street, the bazaar, and even the noises of the rest of Delhi, totally gone. And you are there in that world of Nizamuddin, Amir Khusro. And, it was just something so important as a conservation, for conservation and protection. And till now, that still doesn't have any protection. And it's all fragmenting. Now, I worked on, after that, I worked on this Mehrauli, which is where the settlement of the last Mughal. That poor man, for him, that was the only place he had in the world, after where his ancestors owned such a big area. And even that, all the different parts of the Mahal were there. Elephant stables, Ratkhana, some bazaars, and where the women's quarters, and also the lesser women's quarters, other women's quarters, and then Diwani Khas, Diwani something, and some of the Mirza Babar's house, Mirza somebody's house. There were so many things there that was all surviving. Again, that is gone. And at the same time, Mr. Dalrymple has become a bigger cult because his Bahadur Shah Zafar did not touch the ground. So, and we, because of our reconceptualization, think from ground up. We think on the ground, and from the ground, the real thing, what to do. So, so I mean, that's why, so that is why it's not easy, and it's very sad. And so we do have a big challenge in front of us, and that is what we have to somehow, I believe the only way you can handle this is through new education and new management. And we have to build it up. I have done whatever I can, but I think we should go on discussing and start slowly adding to this. And so that you have a total system on your plate by the end of it, and you can actually then tell everybody about it and get it officially on. Also, that is to that extent one has to think about it, and then then the coherence is the coherence was so evident when I saw it. I am not sure how much it survives today, and how much it's you might only see a few fragments, and that is very sad, And and I think even Rima was saying that it is it should not happen, and we should see how we can protect. This is all under protection. That is the lack. Now, protection is something other people have to do. You and I can't do it. Okay. So I think that is where we must say that the government has to do it. They really have to take responsibility and good interest in it. And somehow it doesn't seem to happen. I've been working since quite a long time, since 40 years. It doesn't matter who is there, but there's always some shortcuts, something else that happens, and then some short-term things that happen, and that is, and everybody is happy, and the site is back. It gets nothing out of it. Now, redefinition of cultural resources was the first step towards protection of living heritage resources, entities, and recognizing the resource on the ground. There will be considerable number. The thing is, the moment you redefine and then you start, recognizing more and more, the numbers start getting more. So now you have another problem. The more numbers you have, it is not easy to handle numbers for protection or management or anything. So you have to use what literature does, language does. They know how to classify, how to categorize, how to make it small, how to systematize. They know through language how to handle it to make it into packages that are more easy. So that is how that takes you into this. So now we have subjects for that, but we have to do all that, teach our students how to do all that. There will be large numbers and they are very unwieldy. So the processing of, I call it processing, categorization, systematization, formulating different ways helps to understanding the inventory and CR information management becomes a necessity. So cultural resource in information management becomes a necessity, and it is quite documentation also falls into this, and so we are now, and that means now we are really talking also about a kind of organization that is required to keep this information safely and protected, and which can be used to enhance it, make it better, etc. Okay, the understanding the spatial cultural resource entity. This is something I feel that people don't want to listen to. Everybody, that even a historical city is itself a cultural resource entity, which is a spatial entity, and it has different parts. I think Dr. Rana might understand a bit, because from it's a geographical entity, and it has its different parts. And all these different parts, the open spaces, whatever in between it, they all have values which we have to consider. So when we talk about a city, we have to think about all these things. So it is actually itself a very, complicated cultural resource entity. And I don't think we really have learned how to understand what are its parts and how to understand. We haven't, because I can tell you in all these 30 or 40 years I've taught, it has made no difference to anybody, teachers or students or anybody. And they just think that take, Delhi, world city, finished, one lump. You can somehow handle it, either udhar karo, and it's not systematic. And it doesn't give respect to the geographical qualities and values, etc. So, these are all the things, are all new ways we have to start, really working out if we want to think, take care of our place. Understanding the spatial cultural resource entity, whether is a geographical category. Cities and villages gain and establish their values through their space, through their very survival and their relationship to each other and the spaces in between them. That is what makes them what they are. That is how we recognize them. Dr. Rana Singh will be addressing the real ground and space as cultural landscape. That is what he is going to be talking about after me now. And a way of looking at the ground and incorporating its past and including the gods and present, and which includes its natural and cultural contents within that space. And we are going to see how to figure this out, how to bring it into some way of analyzing and and recommending for it, and analyzing it and understanding it. And where not as in planning, architecture or urban design, where we are trained to see empty plots and empty spaces for our development, for our statement. So that is how all these different we have been trained that the whole place is empty, no plot, no nothing, everything is empty. So we have to change from that, and only when we start putting all these contents in it and start making that inventory, analyzing it, we will be able to understand these spaces and buildings in a very new way, in the real way to understand. So that is what I'm talking about now. Understanding historic cities and cultural landscape is a new challenge, and India has thousands of historic cities within their with their cultural landscapes. I have used the inventory technique. This is a personal use this inventory technique to organize architectural information, which becomes part of my knowledge systems approach. So that empty city, where now we will know how to describe the buildings using this inventory to get architectural information, and use the same technique of inventory. Okay, and empty city without otherwise we will have empty cities without meaning. The style of what is the most fashionable thing to do is a precinct. This precinct within Jaipur, that precinct within some. They are not precincts. They have to be understood by the local people in the local language. And there is and one has to understand that. And the only thing you can go by is the plottage, which is a legal thing. Otherwise, you can't give new names to these things. It's meaningless. It's only more confusing, because there are all these students who start talking about precincts. And if you look at all the projects that have been done, where some 2 or 3 precincts in a very beautiful historical city, they all destroyed it. The people have supposed to have done something good are actually part of the destruction. So that's what it is. So you have to find the right way of doing things to organize. Otherwise, we will have empty cities without meaning. This informed, this exercise will lead to the rediscovery of the local architecture and to inform local knowledge for responsible decisions to be taken on the city, for conservation and all that, because that's what. And the idea of architectural knowledge systems for building knowledge is to fill these empty historical cities. This brings in a new area and suggests a new organization to take up information and knowledge concerning heritage sites, a way of information management of geographical areas for conservation is for everything: administration, education, planning, and development, where cultural contents and significance is accounted and updated. This is a new essential that is required for the new management. Interface with planning is required if the culture and cultural resources have to cohabit nicely with growth and development and new development. So so there needs what is called a interface. You cannot go with a planning way of doing things and in one linear way and go on, and then 2, 3 call a conservation young person to put a few little buildings there to show that there is something there. Not that way. The buildings, resources, they have to be done for their own sake, from their own departments, and they have to be comprehensive to start give all the meaning and values that it has. It can contribute. All that should be done. Jurisprudence is one of the new theory subjects in that curriculum of 2002. And I think Vishakha will be talking about this. This subject began as heritage law. It's easy to understand that. But heritage law is doesn't say anything about India's heritage. It doesn't go together. So this whole thing has been given the slant of looking at it as jurisprudence, principles, theories, what you see on the ground, so that it becomes more of a good discourse on this. And from there, slowly, we can decide on the legal instruments that can be formulated from that. Soon learned that it was very limited. Hence, the approach was changed to jurisprudence. Now, crafts knowledge will be covered, but technological knowledge systems by Navin Piplani later, but not technological knowledge systems, because Arun Menon is not coming today. Management per se and total quality management, that's very important. You have to understand basic management and also understand total quality, because quality is important. And conservation of sites and buildings is a very complex area with many steps to achieve the desired result. And so the whole methodological ways are also very complex, to enable seeing layers of heritage with its additions and subtractions and changes. And again, there's no allocations, in the management for all the responsible tasks that have to be done. It's only that even for you, if you want to work on a World Heritage site, the documentation cost is just from the whole, in some conservation cost of the site, for the site. It doesn't have, specific that documentation, better, things that are done, kept in the office for future, for again using, etc. And because they are giving you the basic knowledge about your site, there's no allocation for that. And no one thinks it's necessary also. So I think we need to change, because there are some fundamentals, protection, this finance, that are not there, and quality. And they all have to be, we'll have to know how to say it, and the way we say it, everybody will understand it. So, that's very important. So limitations in heritage, instead to what is happening, heritage committees, they are also limited. Before it was all friends who could be on the committee. Now they might have one, professional or whatever, but that's not the way. That I see is a colonial way, to have only committees, because they don't need to have knowledge about the heritage and all that. They can, and anyway, those times they had a very limited number to think about. And, so now with all these new numbers, you just have some kind of chat sessions, whatever, meetings with committee members. And, how do you know with all these committees can come together and work for a purpose? Now that nobody thinks about, even if they are really qualified and they are able to do that, all that is. So committees know. Instead, what I am proposing is look for examples. Increase the professional and technical education and management capacity properly. And for that committee business, I have some examples, of where, all the changes have been done for the 20, 30 years. It's so third rate. It doesn't make any difference. Instead, it spoiled that whole campus, which was maybe an outstanding campus of the 19th century. That's the way it is. And I think that's about all I have. And all I'm saying is it's new education and new management, and it's very different. So we all have to start from the beginning and reach to where we can be useful for our heritage. Thank you.
Thank you, Nalini ma'am. That was a very informative, setting the agenda for the meeting today. I would like to introduce the moderator for today's program, Professor Lakshami Priya. Professor Lakshmi is assistant professor and an architect with Masters in Architectural Conservation from School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. She is currently teaching in the Department of Architectural Conservation, SPA Delhi. She has worked as a conservation consultant with several government agencies like ASI, DDA, HUDCO. She has also undertaken international training programs, particularly ICOMOS and Asian Academy Heritage Management Training course on Heritage Impact Assessment. I'll request Professor Lakshmi to initiate the roundtable with our panelists today. Madam, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Monalisa. Good afternoon, everyone. We will now commence the roundtable on new education and management for responsible conservation in India. We had one such roundtable last week where we explored several themes which were relevant, which could be taken into the new education mode. The focus areas will be to examine various challenges of new education pertaining to some of the themes that have been identified for today's roundtable: management of cultural landscapes, jurisprudence, how to achieve sustainable development goals, living heritage and its management, traditional knowledge systems, integrating craftsmen into current management, heritage management and ground realities. We have with us on the panel academicians and professionals who are going to give their viewpoints and share their experience with us in this field. So we have Professor Dr. Rana P.B. Singh, we have Dr. Vishakha Kawathekar from SPA Bhopal, we have Shalini Dasgupta, Secretary ICOMOS, we have Professor Jigna Desai from CEPT Ahmedabad, Professor Sonal Mithal from CEPT Ahmedabad, Architect Navin Piplani, President ICOMOS, and Architect Suryanarayana Murthy, Regional Representative, South Zone, ICOMOS. With this brief, I would like to introduce the first speaker of the roundtable, Professor Rana P.B. Singh. He is a Professor of Cultural Landscape and Heritage Studies and was the former head of Department of Geography, Institute of Science, Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi. He is also the president of Asian Cultural Landscape Association, Reconnecting with Your Culture. And he is serving as a contributing member for ICOMOS IFLA International Scientific Committee on Cultural Landscapes, Chief Coordinator, ICOMOS National Science Committee, Cultural Landscape, Expert and Voting Member, ICOMOS International Scientific Committee for Places of Religious and Ritual. And he is researching in the fields of cultural landscape, sacred scapes, pilgrimage studies, religions and spiritual tourism, heritage scapes, cultural sustainability and settlement systems in North India ever since the last 4 decades. He has several publications to his credit. His publications are on Kashi, which include 11 books, anthologies, and 142 papers. And he has a total publications of 340 papers and 43 books. With this brief introduction, sir, I would like to welcome you to share your thoughts on new education today.
Okay, thank you very much, and namaste to everybody, and so glad to see my very inspiring 2 great divine Shaktis, Nalini and Rima ji. And namaste to everybody. So this is just giving you a short background in more theoretical or philosophic perspective. But preparing a report, what Nalini has long back already inspired me, that we should try to put our own constructive frame of Indian cultural landscape, and then we compare to the West and say how rich, how deep we are. It is nothing like only the superimposition. So that is the basic background. Here I am giving you just a general outline that how the story has started. And I hope that by March 2024, next year by March, this is in a process already accepted in the International Journal of Architectural Engineering from Italy. In that we are preparing that report. Okay, so just to give you a quick idea that how this whole idea of sustainability and culture linked together, you all remember that 1987, that Brundtland report that he put that one-sided society, environment, and economy all meet together with the set theory and call it sustainable development, etc., etc. Later on, it has been realized in 2007 that now culture is a very important part, and that's why culture is added a 4th pillar. And still many people say that is 4th pillar, but that idea is already been finished. But then it has been realized after 1 year now, it is culture nothing like a separate part, it is at the core. And the last one is considered in 2015, that is in November, that culture is the covering shape. So that is the idea, and that it is nothing like that we can say the classical thing. This is coming very close to Indian perspective. Here is the overall perspective. Of course, that was developed by a well-known economics from Australia, but he has taken the Asian perspective that how the cultural landscape to be seen as a representative of national identity, what already Nalini has referred, that identity. So here is something important like this. This is the whole review is going on in process: aesthetic value, social value, authenticity, symbolic value, historical value, spatial value, all together in a holistic frame that cultural landscape to be taken as a representative of the nation. In terms of keeping the values system, so here is a very broad perspective what is in the Western context, which need to be modified in our own. We are working on that. Valuable landscape at the core, aesthetic value, identity value, cultural historical value, recreational value, what is now going on. And very rightly, it has been pointed out by several scholars, including ourselves and our whole team, that we are mostly emphasizing, always saying tourism, culture, tourism, or tourism. But that is very dangerous for our country. Nothing like tourism. All that holy cities and all the ancient journey, even today, these are pilgrimages. They are a spiritual journey, religious journey. It is nothing like that, just for fun and recreation. So that thing, what is fitting into Western context, to be changed and modified in this way. That in another perspective, we have to see that very easily we take UNESCO scale that tangible, intangible. Whatever cities, 5, 6 cities we have studied, there is nothing like strict sense tangible and intangible. Always it has a mix, it is a holistic. It is what Nalini has said, interfaced complexity of situation. So this is one side, you can say natural phenomena. Simple example I can cite already in UNESCO heritage site inscribed that Ramnagar Ramlila. That is a fixed site, fixed environmental condition. It is nothing like the normal theater. It is called like environmental theater. And then all those other intangible activities going on. How you can separate this? So this is in between, transitory position. And that is the thing that what we call that emphasis on interdisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity. So in our culture, it is so complex, so historical, and so much variety and distinction that no way we can put that. Like they have given the 4 group of intangible heritage. Okay, we have studied 2 cities and we find that no way we can put all the intangible sites or references under that category. So we have developed 10 categories at least. Okay, we appreciate that, but no way our category is going to fit into that one. Here comes all this. So that's to say that what very important thing is that you can try to what we call Gandhiji self-realization, self-retrospection. What Nalini said that more than ever today, this is a national responsibility beyond obligation to comply with international directives so as to ensure protection of our identity through culture. Remember, this is our identity. So the most important thing is place attachment, cultural attachment, and your deeper feeling to the land. We have studied some areas like this one in Korea, Japan, and China are working very good practically. Here not. So that is the emphasis, our issue. And then we can claim that this is the Indian cultural landscape we are going to talk about. So that idea was developed long back 2011. But last year, a very famous book came that is called The World as Culture by Paul Schaefer. And thanks God that he has been so closely related to Nalini. I just interacted only 2 years ago. Nalini have a long association. What he used to say, manifesting culture as the cosmic whole. It is the whole cosmic perspective. It is all that human consciousness linking to the world. And that idea, if you read that book, which is a very popular book now, lot of debate going on that book, he directly, indirectly, always, I don't think that he has visited India, but anyway, so many Indian perspective, he tried to use that in that person. So just to give you an idea, that the story started in a written and very concise manner in 2011. And it took again 11 years. That globally it is going on, they may give it to Indian or not, but the root is there. That far. So that is the point to think over that. So just to put in a very simple way, the cultural landscape in Indian perspective, I am saying, transferred and absorbed stimulus on the pathway of succession, sustenance, and sustainability, 3 years. Thus, it shows its regional context, what Nalini used to say, geographical context, or in other way say, we say ecological regions, while having the reciprocity of distinctiveness and generality. Every region, like she again cited some example that you go to a very small level settlement, so you find 2 characters. One is distinctive and other is generality. bridging between locality and universality, all having mixed together. So we have to be very clear in that perspective. The Indian cultural landscape should also be viewed as a process and an expression through an observer's attitude and background in terms of three M's: meanings, how it was imposed, how it was interpreted, how it has been given in the context of the other context. Metaphors, what symbolism, what sign, what images, what visual things you are going to explain them. And mainly in what context, started from the individual to going to the whole national level. So that is, we can say that is the Bharatiya, Sanskriti Bhutrisha, Indian cultural landscape. So just giving you background, and then I come into the main point. These are the framework. This model has been prepared by a living legend in anthropology. He is already 99 years old, Subhas Malikji. Indian cultural landscape, territorial expansion. So just he put a model that everything depends upon the mental construct of the thought, what to be called a belief system. There are two views to see. It is just like the same coin you are going to see from the two perspectives. One you are going to from the human perspective framework, and other you are going to see the regional or geographical context. So both are, you can say, side by side. Like here is individual, then parallel is local table. In clan family, then you can social formation, then you can say village level, then you can say cultural perspective, the region, then ecological. This way all mixed together, and just symbolically I am representing with this photograph. You can see India, mixture of all this. See, here is a representation of conch shell from Puri, representing all Indian thought in grabbed on this beautiful conch shell. So this is the way what Paul Schaeffer used to say, cosmic whole, and this is the Indian example like that. Now, coming to International Union of Conservation of Nature, and there is already one particular section there dealing with the spiritual context of the landscape. And Bas Vasturen, who is involved in a Dutch fellow, but very close to Indian perspective is here. They have taken so much collaboration with the Indian party scholars, and they have produced a simplified model, and they have tested in the three ancient cities of the world how it is working. So it starts from the local knowledge, management. So here is basic directly nature, institutional worldview, and then cosmovism. So you can say it started from the natural world in close way, and then going to the super consciousness of mind to understand the spiritual world. They have again tried to put this human world, natural world like this, and the spiritual world all together, sacred religious sites had to be defined and had to be put in planning and perspective. This is one other example that is based on Richard Geddes, the man who had introduced the civic sense in planning during 1910. And in Indian context, Indore and Varanasi, two examples he has already studied. He was here as a town planner. So the important thing is that how to change that, which is more important that we can have that type of thing. Later on, I will add that Indian perspective, how it is going to solve that problem. At least theoretically, we have already guidelines. If here is their guideline, their track is there, then we have to mobilize it. Survey, imagination, soil. When he says soil, it is not in abstract sense. Soil means you can say it is just like Gayatri. Love, institution, art, science, sense, synthesis, utopia, also imagination. And all together, we have to make that place a placeness of the whole thing. Place can speak, place you can feel just like mother. And only. So that consciousness we have to awaken and put these those things in our courses to generate that. Like a new, just now I was going through yesterday, I found that one institution had started nothing like your mobile, no computer, it is whole dialogue, go into nature, go to the small tribal old settlement, learn from there, and then try to learn how to do something good for them. So this is the way what Patty Geddes was talking. Now coming to the last part, that when we are talking about this heritage context and city, so already a lot of debate going on how to define heritage. We have written that article based on going to the Atharva Veda and Satya Brahmana, that our whole idea linked to heritage concept, that is Dharohar, not Virasat. That is another problem, defining the word some in a funny way, and the whole historical meaning है. विरासत has no context in Sanskrit. Brahmana धरोहर है. Anyway, so just giving that idea, it was discussed in the 11.7 that the sustainable development goals. Based on that, a sustainable heritage city system should have at least 6 bases. Setting up the vision in that perspective, identifying the goals, what are met, you can select based on priority level, achieving the political cohesion that we are lacking always. Too much talk, but practically not. One example I can say, here is in Varanasi, also started in Ujjain, now going to be also. They say Kashi Vishwanath corridor. What is corridor? There is nothing like any concept of corridor in our Indian context. Hey, Kshetra, you can say Parikshetra, you can say Pavan. This David Safar has already challenged long back this. So that is the way that you have to choose those words rooted in our culture and then try to link with the public mass. Building of that whole structure like this, meaning imposed and interpreted both way, accountability, responsibility, who will be there, how there will be close participation for the stakeholders, people should take care, etc. A wonderful example we have started in Korea. 2-3 temples area, no government, nothing like that. All people based and they have developed in interior area. And we have several such examples in the historical past. Okay, so after this, based on this reconnecting with your culture that started 2.5 years ago in 2001, and the Olympia is taking lead of that, and we are collaborating. Maybe in future we'll prepare some report as Nalini has given this task that we are building this. So it's a very simple thing, is a cosmic frame of culture, nature interfaces through the quality and deeply rooted education and balance. How to do all these things? So that is simple way that you have to link holiness, that is humanity, to wholeness, sublimity. So that RWYC attempts to awaken and vision, this is based on the Gandhian thought. Education for life, education through life, education throughout life. Education does not mean that the way we are defining literacy and educational degrees. So I think whenever we are saying new, it is not only new, it is the new form of awakening the ancient thought for the future perspective of the whole global nation. This is just to give you the last 1-2 slides, that's all. This is based on what we call the landscape ecology, developed by a Chinese scholar now in the US, who he tried to link all those things, yes, sustainable science, local, regional, global, all things to be developed. So this way we have also to construct, not to copy, but we are working on that, just to make our own framework in Indian context. And then we can project it in the Asian context. And then we can say, here we are. That will be a wonderful exercise based on the 14 points raised by, I have noted all these points for knowledge here, 14. So that is a very good symbolic number. So let me just come close 1 or 2 more slides, that we have to think cosmically, see globally, behave regionally, and act locally, insightfully. And that will give the spirit of understanding the Indian cultural landscape. So I think this is finished. Yes, within 7-8 minutes. So thank you very much for giving this chance, and namaste, sadar pranam, on so much obligation to everybody to listen this theoretical perspective. But soon when the rough draft will be completed, I will send to Nalini for a lot of critical comments, as she always do that, critical but constructive. And then we can circulate it so that we can prepare what a long way she has wished to have something like a frame and format, so-called Indian cultural landscape. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. It was really you touched upon very important points related to values of Indian cultural landscapes, then, sustainability, heritage city systems, things like think cosmically, work locally, transition from very metaphysical to physical. Very interesting, sir. Thank you so much. Now we move on to we will have question answer session at the end. Right now we move on to the next speaker for the day, Dr. Vishakha Kawathekar. A brief introduction. She heads the Department of Conservation in the School of Planning and Architecture, Bhopal. She is also author of the book Legal Frameworks for Built Heritage in India. She's engaged in research on perception, interpretation, and memory of heritage. She actively engages in training professionals and the capacity building of administrators towards the protection of heritage. With this, Vishakha, may I invite you to talk on jurisprudence and the legal systems in India.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. It is actually, we really are thinking a lot, and I think it is a good sign, because unless these discourses happen, a lot of the issues really are issues, and we are unable to find solutions in a long way. I would like to begin with the paradox of what the law protects to what we wish to protect. The archaeological heritage largely is protected by the law, but then it is extended to the built heritage. Now, these two lie into paradigms, because archaeological heritage heavily depends on the material evidences, while built heritage works on the value system and the heritage which has value for the people and the community that is there. It is also a representation of the past history, and it goes beyond the dynamics of the good and the bad. Rather, built heritage tries and protects every layer of history without giving the prominence to a certain age, certain patronage, and seems to be more equitable. Hence, we have to go beyond the archaeological act that is in place, because the archaeological monuments, Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Site and Remains Act, as it says, is largely for ancient monuments which are of national importance as per they being listed. Then it extends itself to the associated antiquities, archaeological sites and remains. And the whole law then depends on protected area and monument. So between what was assumed to be protected in post-independence, because the act still continues and we haven't really been able to put up our efforts in redefining the definition of the heritage that we need to protect. And I think there is a problem, because unless we redefine the heritage that we want to protect through law, we are always going to be struggling with the piecemeal approach. The only solution that was seen was when the law for Hampi Management Authority was passed, or for Champaner it is being passed, or for Majuli which is being passed. Lot of us do not realize the importance of the Majuli Cultural Landscape Act. The operationalization of the act might be a problem, but it is one of the landmark acts where the traditional management systems of the landscape has been incorporated into the legal system. So this kind of experimentation, which has already happened, has not been used as a precedent for many heritage sites in India. And I think there a lot of review needs to be done. The other thing that I really want to emphasize on is that lot of talk about Indian knowledge systems is happening currently, and it is being promoted by the government heavily. Now, this kind of knowledge that we are going to bring out has to get incorporated into the legal systems. And usually it happens that you have a jurisprudence which gets incorporated into the policy of the land, and from the policy paper, it gets trickled down into the law of the land. It cannot happen just by we intending to get it into the law. Therefore, efforts of us professionals and ICOMOS India as a platform should be on formalizing and institutionalizing this jurisprudence we can ultimately get incorporated into the policy document. And here, I think we have to really, really work very hard. Now, the act, the MSR Act talks about 100 meters and 200 meters, not only horizontally, but vertically, above ground, below ground, all directions. Now it is trying to take its place, not above ground, but below ground and horizontally from the protected boundaries. Even the National Monument Authority is finding it difficult to demarcate the protected areas very clearly. But with the help of Bhuvan maps, with ISRO coming into being, with satellite images, lot of effort is being taken into creating these protected boundaries. The effort is acknowledged, but the problem comes when we are trying to put in the 100 meters and 300 meters boundaries. It is a proven fact that these boundaries need to be rationalized. If you look at the main act that is there, it always had an option of creating your own buffers. But there came an example where 100 meters and 200 meters was established for few sites, and then we have taken it as an example and applied it as a blanket to all archaeological sites. It has its strength, but it has its own weaknesses too. And really, to deal with these kinds of buffers is becoming a problem. ASI Act though talks about prohibited and regulated areas, but when it is to be translated into international way of communicating, we say, okay, the protected area becomes the core and the 300 meters become the buffer. Now, regulation in the buffer area is a difficult job because you have to deal with living people, and people have a right. So, as Constitution of India gives us the right to choose the way we wish to live, the way we want to acquire property, and the way we need to survive, we have all equal rights. Then it becomes a huge contradiction between the protector of the heritage versus the persons who are living in the vicinity of the heritage. So they get into a tussle which is not healthy for heritage at all. The challenges increase because of the diversity which we have to deal with. We have a diversity to be dealt with, a social diversity, economic diversity, as well as the cultural diversity. In very, very dense areas, even to think about conversations and negotiations become difficult because it is always the power and politics which comes into being, and then it becomes very, very difficult. Hence, we have to go beyond our understanding of what we once thought was rationalizing 100 meters and 300 meters to the nearest geographical feature, the physical feature, or to the nearest road, because we didn't want those lines to cross through individual property lines. So one thing which is proven fact is that heritage has to deal with ownerships. What ASI does is that the major ownership which ASI acknowledges is regulatory in nature, which they would get into an agreement with only the other government bodies, or at many a times the temple trusts which are there. But getting that kind of an understanding with individual owners in the vicinity of the heritage is becoming day by day very, very difficult. Another area of lot of thinking is that these days we find lot of evaluation of heritage is based on economic models. Now, economics in heritage is good for an argument, but not for its sustainability, because not every heritage needs to be evaluated on economic scale. Equitable representation of past and history really has to be put forward in order to make a difference. Otherwise, all sites which do have a footfall will always be an advantage to the sites which do not have footfall because of its remoteness, or our own decision to not to let it exposed to the world unnecessarily. These days, commodification is also a problem, which I have also spoken in the last week. And why I call it commodification is because heritage now has the pressure of entertaining tourism, has a pressure to increased pilgrimage, and that is also becoming short term, yes, we see its benefit, but long term we have to understand it is not good for the sustainable future, because we are changing the fabric of the city and changing the culture of the place in a very, very fast manner. Therefore, a lot of thinking has to be given on that also. Conversations, public participation, negotiations are good words, but when it comes to numbers, they also fail, because common consensus are never being built up. So is it that we are good issue identifiers and very less in capacity to find solutions? Is a topic which, as professionals, we should think at large, because we have been speaking about lot of theories in terms of carrying capacity, in terms of heritage economics, but we have been failing in giving solutions which stem out from these theories. So another area where we have to work extensively is traditional knowledge and preparedness of climate change through heritage, if we really have to make ourselves relevant to the society. And we have seen that all traditional water sources that we have, the wells, the step wells, and all kinds of water structures that traditionally we have been using, if we renew, if we rehabilitate, could contribute a long way into the preparedness of climate change. So have we looked at potential of heritage towards preparedness to the coming future, which is more environmental in nature, changing rapidly, because it's no longer the past. Now we are living into that change and taking it to the future. So apart from these theoretical brainstorming, I think finding a solution which is operationable and implementable and giving those kinds of direction to the implementers is necessary. Otherwise, the ad hocism towards the way we are trying to find solution is going to continue. Hence, I think that as professionals, it is important that we now work on solution finding, which is based on a theoretical framework, but anchored in the jurisdiction that we have. And the need of law is a very clear mandate, because after 75 years of independence, we are still continuing with the definitions that are there, but not rethinking into what actually should be the heritage for which we are struggling so hard. I think I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vishakha. Thank you for emphasizing on the need to find solution from the theoretical base. We all talk about theory, but how to put the theory into practice is real challenge, and how the new education can actually address this challenge is something that we need to think about and come to some consensus. According to the program, the next speaker is Shalini, but I don't see her online. So we move on to the next speaker, that is Professor Jigna Desai. I'll give her a brief introduction.
Yeah, I think you have been introduced last time. So
I know, but there are some new people here, so they need to know about you. So very briefly, I won't take long. She is Head Center for Heritage Conservation. Dr. Jigna is an architect with an expertise in working with existing and historic built environments. She has for over a decade worked towards consolidating conservation education at the faculty. The master's program in conservation and regeneration that was introduced by her in 2018 is widely recognized and was presented as a commended case of global innovation in World Heritage Education, the 44th session of World Heritage Committee in 2021. Her previous role at the university include Head of Undergraduate Office, Head of Gender Parity Mission. Her overseas work include heritage monitoring missions, evaluations and advice for the International Council for Monuments and Sites. She is also visiting professor at Nottingham Trent University, UK, and has lectured on international platforms. Her most notable book is Equity in Heritage Conservation, The Case of Ahmedabad. She is also co-founder of a small award-winning architecture practice, Jigna Desai company, where she brings resource conservation perspective to architectural design processes at all scales. With this brief introduction, I invite you, Dr. Jigna, to please share your views on.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for this platform again. I think last time I spoke about certain aspects that we talk about in conservation education. I spoke about the question of innovation, co-production, the introduction of technologies, and the idea of understanding the idea of layered sites. Today, what I would like to do, I think it's when Nalini ma'am was talking about this question of precinct, and I'm very glad that will connect very well to what I'm going to share just now, because what I'm going to share is a video on the urban regeneration studio, the way we conduct it. This video is prepared by Jaishri Bardhan and Ashina Patel. They were the ones who had tutored this particular semester. Urban regeneration is generally taken by was taken by me before 2021 when Jaishri and Ashna took up, and after that, I think once again Jaishri and me, and now for last two times Jaishri and Gurmeet are taking up this studio. But I'll share my screen. It's a 9-minute video that talks about how we conduct the studio here, that tries to address these different complexities and layering of urban heritage. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Yeah, so I'll start the video here.
Urban Regeneration is the third semester studio of the Master's Program in Conservation and Regeneration at CET. The studio is based on the premise that living historic cities are persistently subjected to processes of physical, environmental, social, economic, and cultural transformation. Change is inevitable and at times essential. However, this change is not always geared towards conservation of historic places and heritage assets. The studio is positioned within this premise of managing transformation in historic urban environments. The studio, with the aim of addressing the complex narratives of historic urban sites through the lens of conservation, introduces its participants to tools and methods of documenting, mapping, and assessing cultural assets of a historic city or settlement to eventually propose comprehensive strategies for conservation-led urban regeneration. This semester, the studio was tutored by Ashna Patel and Jaishri Bardhan, with Z.S. Pitawala as the teaching associate. 2 2 sites were taken up, one at Dharmaj and another at Tankshal in Ahmedabad. One student had opted for an online semester and chose the city of Kolhapur for her site. Through the entire studio, students engaged with the site, its inhabitants, and the stakeholders responsible for site transformation, designing multiple methods and strategies for stakeholder consultations. The structure and premise of the studio allowed the students to immerse themselves in a process that is closest to an actual on-ground, people-centered, heritage-led urban regeneration process. It presented them with the opportunity to understand challenges and strengths of such a process firsthand, preparing them for their future work as conservation professionals. The studio had 4 important components. First, mapping the historic timeline, evolution of the historic settlement, and establishing a sense of place through archival research, site observations, and conversations. This was supplemented with collecting preliminary data on the existing protection and management mechanisms for heritage, legislations, and proposed projects, development schemes, or plans. Second, attribute mapping, identifying and assessing the multiple values of the attributes, the sources of the values, and articulating their significance. Third, identifying and analyzing the issues that surround the historic settlement, documenting transformation and its impact on the heritage assets and their values through fieldwork and stakeholder consultations. And the fourth, identification and application of various conservation-led urban regeneration strategies based on the analysis. The first 3 components of the studio informed the fourth. Each component had specific exercises designed to aid students' work. However, these components were not completely linear processes. Therefore, exercises in the studio over the course of 6 months were designed for each component to be periodically revisited as more regarding the site and its stakeholders was reviewed. In the first 4 weeks of the semester, students worked at their respective sites in groups. The group work involved understanding the historic timeline, mapping the historic settlement, its attributes, and identifying stakeholders. Accessing diverse sources of information, authenticating information through data triangulation, acknowledging contradictions in data, and understanding the scope and limitations of diverse information sources was an important part of the process. Both the sites, though very different in many aspects, revealed strong traces of difficult heritage. Dr. Trideep Suhrud was invited to deliver a guest lecture on uncomfortable pasts, which was followed by engaging discussions with the students on society's response in addressing their pasts and the role of a heritage professional in it. This lecture formed a crucial link between the group work and the following individual lines of inquiry. In the 5th week, to initiate the students into individual projects, building on the group work, 2 readings were introduced: UNESCO's recommendation on historic urban landscapes and the Hriday guidelines. Using either of these 2 frameworks as the point of departure, each student made their individual frameworks for the rest of the semester. Additional readings were recommended to aid their understanding of key concepts. The frameworks were then gradually tailored as per individual lines of inquiry. As the projects began shaping, specific ideas, literature references, normative tools, methods, and case studies were introduced. For example, methods of assessing quality of life and sustainable development, risk assessment, prevalent discourses on heritage interpretation, counter-narratives, and nature-culture interlinkages were discussed. After the mid-semester stage, when the students had embarked on their individual projects and had designed their individual frameworks of study, a week-long workshop titled Methods for Analysis of Historic Urban Environments was held. This was to enable students to utilize their learnings from their urban systems course to analyze their individual sites in the studio. The workshop included a lecture component on analysis methods, followed by discussions with individual students in a format that enabled peer learning. This stage onwards, as per their individual project needs, students began documenting specific heritage assets assessing their values, mapping transformation, present conditions and issues, and formulating problem statements. As in any semester, this semester led to processes of reflection for the tutoring team. Through the urban analysis workshop, we realized that though all students had great ideas, some lacked the visualization skills to translate ideas into tangible spatial representations. In terms of analysis of the historic urban fabric, committing to drawing the observations made on the site beyond maps at a much earlier stage of the studio would have facilitated a stronger understanding of tangible and intangible elements that make the fabric. However, ways to bridge this lack of skills in the students is something we need to address in the future. Another challenge for students was the transition from a completely online mode of teaching to a blended mode. Students' enthusiasm to engage with the site and stakeholders was great. However, some students grappled with first-hand documentation through drawings due to this shift. Some students took longer to interpret the massive amount of data gathered from the site to articulate a problem statement. Though the studio involved exercises to aid this, formulating methods to further improve this exercise is an aspect to address in future. While students began addressing the question of how the diverse views of the multiple individuals and stakeholder groups can be identified, articulated, and presented to frame urban regeneration proposals, the course of the semester has led to some critical reflections for the studio component, for the tutors as well. The inherent necessity of periodically revisiting the value assessment and significance description process to be more firmly structured into the weekly schedule of the semester so as to be as true to a real assessment scenario is one of the key takeaways from the semester. An important positive realization was that this deeply immersive process with the site, people, and current discourses and methods from the field of heritage studies and heritage-led urban regeneration enabled eliciting a range of urban regeneration approaches and transformation strategies from the students. The diversity in the individual lines of inquiry is a reflection of this. While some projects propose conservation and management guidelines, some look at marginalized narratives and valorization of diversity in heritage. The importance of economics in heritage is realized in one of the projects. Another one proposes interpretation as a key tool for regeneration. All students were actively encouraged to visualize and assess the long-term impacts of their strategies. The full range of student projects is available in the student work folder, and we invite you to look through them.
Okay, so I'll have just stopped sharing that, but I think that was the example of one of the studios that we take in order to address this question that how do we look into the question of urban heritage without trying to create boundaries around certain areas and saying that this part of creating a boundary of that then gets called as precincts. And then the logical response to that is that the precinct gets conserved and everything around, whether it is in relationship to that precinct or not, then is open to change. So in order to challenge that assumption of conservation processes and conservation education, this was the process that we had introduced. I think I'll end there and we'll take up discussions later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jigna. That was very interesting to see. Yes, it opens up thought whether we should actually keep looking at heritage precincts or the heritage in totality as a whole. We move on to the next speaker for the day, which is Dr. Sonal Mithal. She's an architect, artist, and educator, and she's program chair, Masters in Conservation and Regeneration at CEPT University. She holds a doctoral degree from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, master's degree from SPA Delhi, and a bachelor's from Lucknow University. She's a co-founder of research and conservation studio, People for Heritage Concern, and is People for Heritage Concern in Ahmedabad. Her work transits architecture, landscape architecture, queer studies, history, and heritage. Her work focuses on processes and agencies of ecological survival, contingencies of identity and representation, and emergent intersectionality as central to shaping of built environment. Her teaching in architecture studio focus on developing contemporary ecological and or politically sensitive design sensibilities based on material research and post-humanist inquiry. She has been commissioned to provide research-based artworks permanently installed at 4 underground metro stations in the World Heritage City of Ahmedabad. She is a co-consultant for the restoration of Surat Castle and several revitalizations of urban precincts in Gujarat commissioned by the City Municipal Corporation. She has published Government Officer Housing Precincts in Urban Lucknow, Lucknow Unrestrained Palimpsest of Incongruous Possibilities, exhibited Matter in the Future Continues, Pavilion at Venice, and so on. Her artworks have also been exhibited in Sweden, USA, Netherlands, Taiwan, and India. She is currently working as a co-author on a book, Queer Architecture of Nawabi Lucknow, Post-Colonial Perspective. With this introduction, I request you, Sonal, Dr. Sonal, to share your thoughts with us.
Thank you, Lakshmi. Thanks for that generous introduction. Thank you, everyone, for this wonderful platform. And it's a very interesting and a significant moment for me to be sharing this platform with Professor Jigna, from whom I have just recently taken over as the program chair. It's certainly very big shoes to fill in. And her presentation is also kind of a very interesting, a very important context for me to present what the program is now shaping up as, like how do we build up on what is already there. So this presentation is mostly about education and directions the education, conservation education I hope to take with the agenda of mainstreaming conservation. So I'll quickly share my screen and I have a brief presentation. Please, Lakshmi or Monalisa, let me know if I overshoot the time. So I will share the screen. Screen visible?
Yes, yes.
All right, okay, yeah. Thank you. So the title of how I've titled is, it's called Every Building Needs Care, Mainstreaming Architectural Conservation. So here, the agenda is to look at every built form, which is in need of some repair or attention or maintenance throughout its life. It's not always related to something which is of the distant past. It is always an ongoing thing, even when we are living in a house or, whenever we are using any built environment, we are constantly contributing to its care, maintenance, and so on and so forth. So that is basically the way we are formulating the vision for conservation education at MCR CEPT, which is the short form for Masters of Conservation and Regeneration. So the vision here is that there is no option but to look at conservation as an ecological act. It is both ecological because it is about, reusing, regenerating, repairing, restoring anything that is already built. And at the same time, also revisiting the excess of architecture, which in the mainstream architectural design, we're constantly building. So it helps, conservation as a thought, as a philosophy, helps to put a break on that we can't constantly simply keep on building. So conservation is essential, and conservation requires care in considering what can stay and at the same time what can go. So the vision also acknowledges age and decay as a means for the new to emerge alongside. It acknowledges a simultaneity of preservation and renewal, which is again the same thing. But more importantly, and I think Professor Rana did talk about that, it challenges the tabula rasa approach to design. Again, Professor Nalini also talked about the thing that there is no empty space. And mainstream architects always look at their project as an empty tabula rasa site. And conservation, by its very intent, inherently, it challenges the tabula rasa concept. It's not there, it's a lie. So that is something we want to foreground. And it provides material directions for intervening in historical settings. So one of the things that we want to also focus on is how do we intervene? Like its intervention can be looked at as invasive, but at the same time, intervention is also something which is surgical in nature. So we are looking at inculcating a little bit of confidence in students to be able to intervene in historical settings, in historical built form as architects. The program positions conservation as a mainstream architectural practice. So that is something that we are focusing on as we move forward. And the current professional landscape in conservation is that there is an increase in a requirement for conservation professionals. More and more tenders are coming out, and there is a need. More and more state and from the government, the tenders are coming out again and again, which require conservation professionals to be part of the team, or at the same time, they require conservation professionals to take up certain projects. And there is an expectation from professionals to go beyond documentation and report writing to actually work on built environment. So how do we prepare our students to become young professionals who are confident enough to take that challenge? So there is a need for professionals who are well-versed in incorporating services and infrastructure into existing built form, keeping in mind aesthetics and user experience. So this is where our training, conservation training, undergraduate training, where the training is in architecture combined with our specialized training in conservation put together, has to be foregrounded and also inculcated in the new minds that you are a complete you are a package which incorporates your undergraduate training as well. So and so on and so forth. So how can education reflect that? You bring a range of conservation themes and give students a choice. You integrate technical services with emphasis on aesthetics and experience. Bring contemporary design solutions for historical built form as part of the studio teaching, and inculcate confidence in students to take charge immediately rather than defer solutions. So keeping that in mind, there is a little bit, how do we frame, how are we framing our education? So we have a foundation studio in which we are bringing the new approaches, contemporary approaches to preservation theory, which is like a seminar, and then we immediately work on the contemporary built form. I'll speak a little bit about the foundation studio in the next slide, so I'll skip that for the time being. And then we have architectural conservation studio, where we will introducing retrofitting component, building extension to existing built form. How do you do that? With an emphasis on aesthetic ambience and structures. And the third semester studio, Jigna had just spoken about, I'll skip that. And then there are a range of other workshops that are offered, like LiDAR scanning, skill-based workshops, heritage and tourism. There are some mandatory courses, archaeological studies, structural materials, history theory and legislation of conservation, which is already, told to the students right up front in the first semester. So moving on. So what does the foundation studio aim to do is it has 4 components. The first is a seminar-style close reading that foregrounds the necessity of weaving historical structures in present-day chronologically chaotic urban realms. So what are those readings that help us look at a built form, which is palimpsestic? It's always layered. It's not a one-time, and it's not linear. It's not historically linear and clean. It is a muddle. How do you look at it, and how do you then decide what is it that you will conserve? So there are these readings, and there are a list of readings on the site that actually also try to answer these questions. They are quite contemporary readings. So we will read that, and then once students internalize it, they create an illustration of a futuristic imagination of a redundant building. So this is a very quick exercise to make them get into the act of what is the future that you see of this building? And then they, after that, they go back and study the chronology of how the building is constructed. What are its repairs and, maintenance issue, what are its structural fragilities and so on. And then they intervene into it as one as retrofit and then as a conservation design. So these are the 4 components. And I just want to reiterate that this studio is both a combination of theory, which is necessarily meaning how to think of conservation and what people have thought about conservation. Of course, and here I want to make a disclaimer that conservation by its very nature is a Western concept. So we will be relying on a lot of theories that have been written by Westerners, especially in today's domain where the world is becoming more global, and then putting it into the context of India and see how that can be tested. Of course, that theory gets rewritten as we are testing it through the studio. And we use CARE as a discursive tool to look at the buildings. So this is like overall a brief idea about what the Foundation Studio will be doing. So I'll show you a little example, which is pretty much on the same lines, but it was offered by me recently in the past semester in spring 2023. And it has a same tone, but it was offered in the architectural design master's program. The site here is Kesarbagh in Lucknow. So we do a seminar style reading, which is about ecology. How do you look at ecology of a built environment, ecology of a historical environment, and think of it as a resource and think of it as a challenge to the tabula rasa approach. Then we also had a series of lecturers come in and study the site. We did not go to the site until we first intervened in the site in a futuristic imagination coming from these readings. So we first prepare the student to actually be a little bit more proactive, such that they are confident to be able to express themselves. Then we go to the site and we do very detailed, elaborate mappings of the site, and it's multifold. It's looking at, one of the students was looking at how is the environment ruinating and what are the evidences in which that built form is accepting that ruination. Then what are the contestations that are appearing in terms of ownerships, that when there are certain ownerships, but then people encroach, they expand and so on. And so there is contestation. How are the people changing their built environment? Because they add a niche here, they open a door, they close a door, they add a staircase and so on and so forth. So what are these retrofittings that people actually do on the site, which are already ongoing? And then there was another emphasis on the studio was ecology. So we were looking at how squirrels occupy the site and so on. And what was the history of the site? It was a Wajid Ali site, Wajid Ali Shah site. I'll not go into the details of that, but these 2 maps are not relevant to this discussion. And then after the mapping, they have to immediately put a retrofit in the building with details about 1:20 details about what is the material going to be and so on and so forth. And after that, they do a final project. So this is overall how even the Foundation Studio of Conservation program is going to build up, with definitely more emphasis on the historicity and the palimpsestic nature of the built environment. Now, I will take like 2 more minutes and walk you through one student portfolio so you can see the entire process from the same project. And this is an illustration the student did for the 3 projects she did. This is the first project, the second retrofit project, and the third, which was an extension to the library in Kesarbagh. So I'll skip all this. So we've already seen. This is the historic site of Kesarbagh. And this is how the students were reading. They look at the archival imagery, they look at the mapping. And this is also one more thing. This is a mapping. This is a studio that I have offered in the second time. So previous time we had like another 10 maps that we made, and this time the students built on that. So it's not a repetition, it's a building on. And then we did the seminars, close reading of 2 books, and then an immediate 1-week exercise in which, so this is a 1-week exercise in which the student had to immediately give their response to the reading. So she created an inclusive, futuristic, safe space, post-human reading pod, which is an extension of the library building in Kesar Park. So without going into the details, she's referring to the old building, and this does not exist. This building does not exist, but looking at historical imagery, she's deriving a place for the squirrels to live and creating it as an environment for people to read, and also creating it as a place where the water can be contained as rainwater harvesting system. So that was, after that, they go to the site, they do the mapping. These are the kind of mappings we do. We are looking at the historical build form, but we are also very much interested in what is the resilience of the build form, historical build form, to be able to contain the vegetation. Here we are also wanting to alter the conservation practice that removes vegetation. We are wanting to integrate it. So to integrate it, what are these materials like plaster, moss, vegetation, dried leaf debris, colonial and post-colonial bricks, pre-colonial Lakhari brick? What is their resilience and what is their receptivity to hold the vegetation, and how do they work in sync with each other? They do like a series of mappings are done. And then they do identification of evidences of hybridity and interdependencies. Basically, they create their manifest, they create their inferences. These are the inferences they draw, inferences from mapping. Like, how do you go forward if you have to think of this as a build form, which can be thought about as a restoration method or something? Then they write their manifesto. It was an architectural manifesto. Here it's going to be a conservation manifesto, where they'll say whether they want to get rid of something, they want to keep something, what are the non-negotiables, and that. And then they retrofit architecture, which is working with the living ruin. And so this is the location of the ruin, and what you see in the red is the retrofit, the rest is all existing. And so it is a creation of a walkway through the ruin, and it's basically cutting through the place. So how do they not touch the building? What is the structural system that is inserted in the building without touching the existing build form? What are the details and so on? What is the roofing with, and then again integrating whether we can create some places for holding the trash from the top and using it as a for composting and so on. And then the same thing continues into a bigger project, which also is interlinked with the Lucknow Development Authority's agenda of what do they want to do with this building. So we look at live projects and try to integrate it. So these are the 3 projects that are integrated with an existing building. And these are more drawings. I will not go into the detail, but this is pretty much like, because one of the things that I want to reiterate is that having this privilege of being able to transact so many professions and disciplines, not professions, but disciplines, especially architecture, landscape architecture, conservation, and now architectural design. I'm able to, like, it's a privilege to be able to draw all these together. But at heart, the core agenda here and the core of all this is that if we are dealing with a built environment, we cannot not think of it as a conservation architect. So in my mind, centrally, conservation is able to draw upon all these disciplines. And that is what we are hoping and aiming to do. And in that way, try to mainstreamize this conservation discipline. at MCR. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Sonal. That was very interesting and a good insight into how studios can be done, how conservation can be brought into a new kind of education system. With that, we move on to the next speaker, that is architect Navin Piplani. He doesn't need an introduction, but all the same, he's President ICOMOS India. He's Director, Creative Cluster and Acting Dean, School of Design, Sushant University. He was former Principal Director, Intact Heritage Academy, and former Director of Studies, Center for Conservation, York University. He's a conservation architect with PhD in Architecture Pedagogy, Sushant University, and inquiry into history, theory, practice of traditional design concepts, and possibilities for use in contemporary design education. He has significant international teaching experience at undergraduate and postgraduate levels on a range of subjects: design thinking, traditional craftsmanship, history, theory of architecture, heritage conservation, legislation and policy, climate change, sustainable development, creative economies, urban conservation, living cultural heritage, urban archaeology, and so on. The key research interests are cultural heritage, climate change, sustainable development goals, world heritage, urban heritage, digital heritage, cultural policy, creative economy. He coordinated and promoted over 50 research projects and secured funding for them. He has designed and delivered national and international conferences and workshops. So with this brief introduction, I request you, Navin, to share your thoughts on what needs to be incorporated into the new education system.
Thank you so much. And again, I'm very happy to see all of you in this mode and hope to see many of you in person mode also. I'm taking it mostly as a roundtable discussion and not so much as a presentation of sorts. So I'm going to be taking this privilege of being the ICOMOS India president, having seen a lot of things over the past few years, and just throw, let's say, a few points on the table, some of which may even contradict what we have been discussing so far. I have said this earlier, and I'm saying it again at the cost of repeating myself, that in the last 3 years or so, as ICOMOS India president, I'm seeing a consistent decline in the interest and encouragement to conservation education and conservation profession. This is evident, and you may do your studies with the number of aspirants that are coming in for admission in architecture conservation course. At one of the national scientific conclaves, I think I had mentioned that these numbers are declining, which is very alarming. Conservation courses are shutting, not only in India, but in other parts of the world as well. And within the organization, there is very little interest in propping this or addressing this idea, which is quite dangerous. We might soon be an extinct species where governments will not need us anymore. So the idea of mainstreaming conservation is, I think, still too far on the path that we are going. We must first have to establish the relevance of our existence. And we can see that our presence doesn't matter any longer in the Central Vista project, in the Varanasi project, in the Sabarmati redevelopment project. And there might be several others which we don't even get to know because media does not report that. So that's a serious concern which I'm putting forth, that before we get on to teaching a couple of students how to do conservation, we need to, as a group, also see whether there will be more such students coming to us in the future anyway, right? So our theories may fall flat if there are no takers for those. That's point number one. Point number two is that if we don't link, and we will have to think of creative ways to do this, conservation education to development, because development seems to be the major agenda of this country. And it seems that the country hasn't developed before several centuries, then in the couple of years that have passed by. So you're all wanting to develop now afresh, and we want to redevelop, we want to reuse, we want to new design and rest of it. And that seems to be the major impetus currently of the system that we are in. And if we were to align ourselves, then we would have to look where conservation fits into this discourse, because at the moment we are seen as people who come and obstruct. We are seen as people who put PILs. We are seen as people who are doing activism on the road. We are seen as people who do not want the country to develop. We may soon be seen as anti-nationals. So that's the dangerous path that we are treading. That's point number 2. NEP 2020 actually gives a good direction, and I've read it quite closely, where it says that even at architecture level and other education streams, the traditional Indian knowledge system should be brought in. And I would argue that it should not be done as electives, but as core subjects. All design, all structural courses, all building construction courses, all art courses, everything that an architect or a designer or a planner is supposed to learn over 4 years or 5 years, the knowledge of traditional Indian knowledge system, the traditional Indian ways of doing things has to be at the core. It cannot be an elective in 3rd year or 4th year. It has to be from 1st semester onwards. What is a sthapati? Not who is an architect. Architect is a Western world term. Sthapati is an Indian term. So we should be learning about who is a sthapati. What does he do? Where does he come from? Where does he live? What does his children do? Where do his family? Do you know when sthapatis travel, they travel with a family. An architect travels alone. For all conferences, all big things, architect travels alone. A sthapati travels with his brother, with his sister, with his wife, with his kids. They all travel with the whole family, because that is the microcosm that they carry. So that was my point number 3. Intact charter, which I think gets kicked around. Nobody wants to read it. Nobody likes it. But intact charter, adopted in 2004, talks about Indian ways of learning and doing conservation. It has a separate section on education at the primary level, secondary level, and higher level. It comes after conservation principles and guidelines, so perhaps people don't get to that. They have lost their interest in the very beginning. But it does mention how education in India should include heritage conservation. And the other important document that we often mention as a reference is the ICOMOS Guidelines of Education and Training, 1993, that were meticulously developed by the late Sir Bernard Fielden and Yuka Giochiletto. A lot of work is happening in taking that forward in terms of capacity building and trades, professionals, craftsmen, etc. But I think we do mention it when we are teaching, but we don't quite teach it. Then we have to think about the organizations. What are these other organizations doing? ICROM, ICOMOS, Getty, UNESCO, York, and all other courses that are in other parts of the world. Because if we were to believe in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam as a policy, then we have to connect and reach out and take the positive things and nice things that all these other people are doing in different parts of the world. I also very strongly feel, and it might just be my perception now that I'm in an architecture school, that somewhere we are teaching conservation in architecture mode. We have lectures, we have drawings, we have site surveys, we have assessments, we have juries, we have everything that a B.Arch student does, but we do it at an M.Arch level. And I feel that this way of delivering a rather philosophical or a rather, let's say, socially and culturally embedded way of looking at things will not take us very far. Maybe that's the reason people find doing urban design more glamorous and interesting than doing architectural conservation at master's level or landscape architecture, because that's more beautiful, that's more aesthetic, your drawings looks nice, and you don't want to present a ruin in your drawing which doesn't have much of a glamour. And that's because our teaching pedagogy is still the same. There's not much difference in how a conservation studio looks like from an urban design studio. Infrastructurally, I'm saying, not in terms of content, but in terms of physical infrastructure. Conservation, urban design, landscape, they all can be taught in the same room. Well, that's not the case. So we need to move away from the very design and architecture of delivering what we are wanting to teach. How and when, and that is something that we have to think about in terms of pedagogy and tools. How can you talk about crafts in your studio? Will you bring a craftsman? How will you talk about resources? Economics, will you bring an economist into your conservation studio? Policies, will you bring a legal expert? Cultural specificities, traditions, will you bring priests and local people who follow these traditions? Because I can wear a suit and make a presentation on it, but I don't follow. Skills, materials, the original intent behind producing heritage and monuments, people who thought of creating Taj Mahal and Qutub Minar and Meenakshi Temple, do we talk about them or do we talk about the Taj Mahal? Do we talk about the traditions and the practices followed in Meenakshi Temple, or do we talk about the fire and the cracks of the Meenakshi Temple that need to be preserved? Conflict. We are living in an age where everywhere there is conflict of one type of another or another. How do we deal with that in a conservation studio? The risks of climate change, earthquake, etc., etc. The sustainable development goals, the politics, the development, the community, and overall the meaning. It's a very complex thing to be, discussing with students. If you put any of these ideas together, I'm again and again saying in a conservation framework, not in an architectural framework designed or tailored to be delivered to conservation students. I think there is a need to develop our own teaching pedagogy and framework where all these rather intangible and living aspects of heritage and tradition and culture can be brought in. It cannot be taught in the Western model or post-independence Indian model also. We have to develop, and perhaps it's too late, our own way of dealing. We don't have to see teaching or sites or cities as projects that in the studio, we do a conservation project, or we take them to a city, or we take them to a settlement, or because again, we are talking the language of an architect. We are doing project, but we are teaching our students how to deal with projects when they come out in the studio, after the studio, like an urban designer or a landscape architect, perhaps. The question is, how do you deliver passion? Because that is what a conservation professional is supposed to carry and survive on the rest of his life. How do you deliver a constitutional fundamental duty? So that is what Article 51A says. It's the duty of every Indian citizen to preserve our heritage. Now, how do you convert that? Now, I think we are more bothered about what Ruskin said and what William Morris said on the age, conservation, restoration, preservation, and this, that, and the other, and the 7 measures of conservation that we want. But that is all Morris and Ruskin. We are not looking at our own constitution. What does Maya Mata say? What does our traditional texts say about conservation? I don't think conservation is a recent phenomena. It has happened for several ages and years. They have been building, rebuilding, repairing, redeveloping, reusing. This has been going on for ages. It's just that some people in the UK, Paris, France, Germany sat together and wrote about how to doing it. So that was my point, that it is a responsibility that all of us are carrying. The question is, how do you convert passion, responsibility, duty, etc., which are rather fundamental and characteristic. They are not things that can be easily fitted into a framework, curriculum framework or syllabus. These things have to be communicated through some other means and modes, for which we may have to develop our own Indian conservation, education and management framework. And that's all that I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Navin. You did indeed raise some very important questions pertaining to education. What is the need of the current conservation education in the country? With these and a lot of points to reflect and think about. Thank you so much. Now we move on to the last, the next speaker of the day, that is Professor Suryanarayana Murthy. Very, very brief introduction, because he insisted I should not give him a long introduction, a very brief one. He is practicing conservation architect and is currently Professor of Architecture in JBR College of Architecture, Hyderabad. He is an independent consultant in the field of architecture, conservation planning and urban design, with an approach of reuse, recycle, restore, appropriate use and maintain as principles of design, planning and execution of projects under his proprietary organization of Kshetra and IHSRDM. In December 22, he was awarded with the Sustainability Initiative of the Year 22 in Dubai. And recently in July 2021, under his leadership, he has got the recognition of UNESCO World Heritage Site status for Kakadiya Rudreshwara Ramappa Temple in Telangana, and is appointed as appointed by the Department of Culture, Tourism, Government of Telangana. He is currently South Zone representative of ICOMOS India. With this brief introduction, I request him to share his thoughts today. Yeah, I think you need to unmute yourself. We can see your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Lakshami Priya. I think I'm just making some practical cases. That is why I titled it as when we do what has to be really brought into our education when we talk about management. As we spoke last week on few cases in education itself. And in particular now, what is it required for management for conservation education in real ground conditions? So that is what I'm going to present. And many points I can see from Professor Nalini talking about the paradox that exists in the current day, which has been again outlined by the other speakers also, Professor Jigna and just now Navin Piplani. From the redefinition of heritage, redefinition from monument to heritage was raised by Professor Nalini Thakur, and she mentioned about architectural knowledge systems being an approach for real ground situation education. And she also mentioned about being able to make theories, So how do we do it in the age of artificial intelligence taking over many disciplines, especially arts and culture and theoretical disciplines where people are worried about. And that is what one has to really think about in the age of this information revolution. And she mentioned about geographical areas, learning this discipline through geographical discipline of geography is very important, which she outlined with cultural landscape and later perfectly again modeled by Professor Rana Singh. And the many issues are identified. Like there are Professor Vishakha mentioned about when she talked about jurisprudence and that is working beyond the acts, like what is a built area, built heritage and archaeological heritage to historic heritage, and where are we really leading to when we are addressing. And what that came to my mind is when we are looking at disciplines, are we teaching and the idea of precinct, when Professor Nalini has mentioned, and when it was demonstrated as a studio work, as an address of taking them through the process of thinking rather than a prescribed discipline of there are boundaries and there are permanent boundaries, and even the question of 100-meter and 200-meter rationalization, which has been mentioned by Professor Vishakha about while attempting these rationalization, we do forget about these ownerships, and ownerships are studied when the rationalization is needed. So the ground conditions demand what is clearly discussed about by the community, by the people. Day-to-day discussions reveal more than what is already being followed through acts and guidelines and regulations. So one cannot go by models and templates. People every time they are confused with these kind of when they say degrees of conservation or modes of conservation, they are confused with some medicine is given and that medicine is useful for any place. That is a most difficult part, and that is how when we integrate with architectural mainstream also people face on ground. So one shall not get confused by following models or following templates. Following models and templates is a very popular way of projecting this discipline, and that is what we see in the complete any current newspaper media or social media, and anywhere, everywhere, people keep circulating these kind of ideas as if a medicine is available and same medicine can be applicable and usable by every city and every place. So that shall be refrained from. So I will demonstrate simply with another in another next 5 minutes. I will demonstrate with some 3 cases of examples and from a little bit from some theoretical input also. What we generally think of the notion of space as perceived by general public and public officials in a city environment is completely different. And the difference in perception means mainly due to the deficiency in understanding how the city has developed and the economics is taking place, the migration and the changing generations, migrating generations. So there are concepts and ideas which are introduced in the whole framework of knowledge in conservation across the world, not only in India, but across the world, because these have been already experimented and talked about, as rightly pointed out by Professor Nalini also. These theories have been experimented and already theorized at many contexts, especially in Europe and in the USA also. These are required to be studied, and we need to go to the ground And from the whole management is required to be viewed from the integrated activity of various disciplines, and everybody will have their role and integrated activity, and conservation has its own role. So it follows the values, cultural and values of historical values, cultural values, aesthetic values, and authenticity that is required. And if it is only tourism centric, it goes in one way. If it is a civic development, civic administration centric, it goes in a completely different way. And there has to be a balance, and we are towards development, as rightly pointed out by Professor Navin, that we are all actually living our lives in current day with these current surroundings. So that is required to be seen very clearly, and there has to be a balance that we see. And I'm demonstrating with one of the examples which we presented in one of the international papers presented in Dubai in an urban regeneration model, where the 3 city examples of Hyderabad, Shahjahanabad, and Amritsar, how this overall perception is understood by local community, and it is a cyclic and continuous activity that keeps happening, and that has to be understood. The management can be understood only from cannot be understood only from single discipline. It has to be from tourism, it has to be from local business, and it has to be from the street vendors who are considered as encroachers by the administration, but for their livelihood is required to be addressed, so they need to be rationalized. And some projects are looked at as a beautification and livelihood projects, and there is also an element of reform or creating new institutions being experimented, like in the name of governance and in the name of regulations, like creating a blanket bylaws or some kind of form-based coding. So all issues are not addressed when a conservation aspect is looked at. And if it is looked at as a whole area, as rightly pointed out in the recent studio exercise in SEPT, one has to look at all these aspects. It is not just only single conservation alone or redevelopment alone. The local community, and it is and there has to be a balance in this. So the spaces are looked at by local community, and it is all through this whole activity, and there has to be a balance. That is what I've tried to show here. And in another case, last week also I presented this as a continuation of the, I had the opportunity to work on this on the revised dossier nomination, though we could not succeed at that point of time in 2012 due to administrative errors that happened at various levels while submitting the dossier. So in this, the island is a physical entity, and the cultural landscape is a geographical entity also. And if you look at the boundaries defined for as against the monument approach, like 100 meters and 200 meter core zones and buffer zones, though that definitions don't exist anymore in even World Heritage nominations also. Now they have also undergone change. But at that point of time, when it was defined, very appropriately defined as a geographical entity, and the influential area is shown as a buffer zone. So it was so the concept itself is completely different. So it has to be taken, and the local people are perceiving that in that manner. So the geographical entities and geographical settings having a notion from cultural understanding within the culture is required to be demonstrated, and for the requirement of dossier, for the requirement of identifying the value of the site, one has to demonstrate it by means of these maps at the cultural institutions within Majuli Island and the larger 800 square kilometers of area. Whereas you have about 32 spots within that 800 square kilometer area. Those 32 spots occupy approximately 0.5 square kilometer area each. One, they're called satras. So they have one management system, and beyond that is another management system, and it is all encircled and connected with the entire water network and the island formation. So there has to be culture related, architecture related management, water land related management, and life and activity related management, agriculture related management, then occupations related management. So the institutions called the satras demonstrate a landscape, satra landscape, and satra landscape is spread over as an overall Majuli landscape, and that is beyond that buffer zone also demonstrates vernacular architecture and geography of settlements and that intangible heritage connected to all these. So all these factors contribute to the management. It is not just only the land alone or architecture alone. So that is why when to document such type of sites require a very complex understanding rather than just only simple monument-centric approach. So this diversity was presented last time. That is what Professor Nalini also has mentioned just now. So this was a documentation taken up during that time. And coming to my last case of example, the recent one, this World Heritage Site, Kakatiya Rudreshwara Temple, as you could see, this site alone is an authentic context and the physical context also. You see on the right side, the Survey of India map with 2 hills and Rudreshwara Temple, and which is maintaining among all Kakatiya temples. This is the only temple which was not accessed by invaders, because the Kakatiya architecture was completely destroyed. Many portions and many temples were destroyed during 13th and 14th century invasions. So this is the only temple surviving in full shape, and due to its location and also inaccessibility to the outer areas, and just situated between the hills and close to a small village inhabited by 2,000 people. So initially Archaeological Survey of India, even now, though they have submitted this 100 meter and 200 meter and 500 meter as some kind of a line definition, now they are thinking beyond that, forming Palampet Management Authority, combining various subjects which was outlined in this management plan. When the management plan was prepared for this, the whole area in the surrounding and how much vicinity, both the visual level connection and authenticity as outlined in the outstanding universal value have been taken into consideration. 3-level management plan was suggested from the ground level, where the conservation management is looked at because the structure is away from any sort of new developments in the nearby vicinity. that core management is by Archaeological Survey of India. Within that 300 meter and even much little more beyond that will be looked after by only in consultation with Archaeological Survey of India, where other departments also play a role, but they in consultation with Archaeological Survey of India, so that the outstanding universal value is not disturbed. Then there is a general management required by local administration, like district deputy commissioner, and because it is within a district and there is no only Gram Panchayat level officers exist, which are required to be elevated to a level of managing this natural resource. So the natural resource is defined due to the suggestion given by ICOMOS inspection during the World Heritage designation process. They suggested to look at the natural resources and the surroundings already incorporated, but it was more emphasized and brought into the framework of management plan now. So the integrated management plan looks at the tourism infrastructure and development infrastructure around it. So what I would like to mention is the ground conditions are required to be integrated with, when we are looking at education, the ground conditions are required to be made aware of, rather than just these models and templates and formats. Of course, procedures, guidelines are different from models and formats. So models, formats, and templates do a lot of damage if we allow mainstream architecture also to practice these things, or if anybody to follow these things. Absolutely, I don't see any problem in future opportunities. Though Professor Navin has identified that there may not be people, or there may not be, there is lack of interest displayed by people. It may be there, but I don't see that. And if we stick to the core discipline of architecture, core discipline of architectural conservation, or conservation as a discipline has to evolve, and it has to consider what has been already developed across the world, and also what has been existing in India, and with the main focus with the Indian thinking and Indian real contextual thinking. With this, I conclude my presentation. Open for discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing such interesting projects that you've worked on and raising some very relevant points and saying that there is a future for conservation in India. Thank you so much for that. With that, I go on to the next speaker. That is the last speaker for the day. She was traveling, so she could not connect earlier. I invite Dr. Shalini Dasgupta. Just a brief introduction to her. She's a conservation architect based in New Delhi and runs a multidisciplinary practice offering services in architecture, interior design, and conservation for the last 26 years. She has received her formal training under internationally noted architects B.V. Toshi, A.D. Raje from CEPT Ahmedabad, and Conservation Studies from SPA New Delhi. Since starting Heritage Conservation and Design Center, the firm has been focusing on adaptive reuse and putting historic buildings to contemporary use. The firm has a special interest and expertise in the field of hospitality with a wide range of clients ranging from Claridge's, Imperial, Lalit, etc. Currently, she is actively involved in the urban conservation of Braj region and the iconic sites of Khajuraho, Bodh Gaya, and Hampi. Besides consultancy, she is actively involved in imparting lectures on conservation and creating awareness both at the formal and the informal level. She is a visiting faculty at Conservation Department, SPA Delhi, Department of Fashion Communication, NIFT, and Interior Architecture Department, Sushant School of Architecture, Gurgaon. She has been an active ICOMOS member since 2013, and she took on the responsibility of the North Zone representative in 2017 and has been holding the post of Secretary ICOMOS India since 2019. She's an expert member of International Scientific Committee of Heritage Documentation, SIPA, and an active member of Heritage Documentation NSC and ICOFORT NSC. With this brief introduction, Shalini, may I invite you to share your thoughts with us today?
Thank you, Lakshmi. I'm sorry for this. I couldn't join earlier, and sorry, Nalini, I don't have really a presentation to share, but I'm going to share some thoughts. What I had been sharing with you independently earlier. So we were talking about, when Nalini was talking about, this dialogue on conservation education, and so there is this whole work at ICOMOS SDG working group, which we have been doing on heritage and gender equality. So because I mentioned to Nalini and said that why don't we also talk about this, so I'll just kind of give a little brief background of what.
Shalini, we can't see you. How do you? Is there a way to do
Nalini, I have not switched on the video because I'm I don't know, the connection is not very
good.
Okay,
then it's fine. Don't worry. Yeah, all right. Okay.
So so talking little about heritage and the sustainable development goals, SDG. So of course, heritage, culture, and natural, tangible, intangible. It's an evolving resource that supports identity, memory, sense of place, and has a crucial role in achieving sustainable development. It enables social cohesion, fosters socio-economic regeneration, poverty reduction, strengthens social well-being, improves and appeals creativity of regions, and enhances long-term tourism benefits. So we must all take up the challenge of conserving this fragile, non-renewable resource for current and future generations. So the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which was adopted by UN in 2015, we all know that it's a plan of action with 5 Ps. It's an action for people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. These are the 5 Ps that they talk about. Founded on the principles of human rights, this holistic plan connects all recent global agendas. Basically, it sets out 17 SDG goals, calling on the world to take the bold and transformative steps that are urgently needed to heal and sustain our planet. And these are the 5 Ps that they, they call for like a plan for action through these 5 Ps. So the 2030 Agenda, however, it represents only a modest progress in acknowledging the role of culture in development processes. Specifically, target 11.4, which explicitly aims to protect the world's culture and natural heritage under SDG Goal 11 on sustainable cities and communities. And there are several other direct and indirect references to culture and heritage within the agenda. There is one, interestingly, under the SDG 4, which is for education, which talks of to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all. That's the SDG goal. And target 4.7 stresses the need for education to promote a culture of peace and non-violence, global citizenship and appreciation of cultural diversity, and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. So, so I thought this was an important point for us, because we are also talking of education, conservation education. So I thought this was an important point that so SDG ICOMOS, the SDG ICOMOS working group has been actively involved in actually helping in promoting this in kind of having the culture agenda represented within the 2030 agendas of SDG, and that's how we have this specific 11.4 on cultural heritage, which is mentioned. The other point that I want to make is so at SDG working group, there are various task teams, the ICOMOS working group, there are various task teams which are formulated to tackle the agenda of various SDG goals. The task team 8 is the task team which is which works on heritage and gender equality. And we have few members of our ICOMOS who are part of the team are Ananya Bhattacharya and Saranya, and myself are part of this from India, part of this task team. So within this, gender equality and heritage work that we were trying to do at the SDG working group, we took on ourselves to kind of explore through various case studies of various countries the gender balance within heritage conservation schools. So basically on the heritage conservation education and profession also. So so with India as the case study, we explored. I talked to a few of our friends here who are also Vishakha and Vaishali, wherever our conservation courses were happening, for us to kind of understand. So for a better understanding of the gender makeup of, we tried to also figure out the gender, since I had access to ICOMOS membership data, I kind of also tried to understand the gender, what is our percentage of the matrix of gender statistics that we have at. So from 16 to 22, that's the data which I kind of use. We are more or less, female percentage has been we've been varying from 58% to 69%. So female gender has been on the higher side compared to the male gender in the ICOMOS membership. Getting to then I tried to look at, we tried to do some statistical to understand the gender makeup of various schools. Of course, SPA New Delhi was the first and the oldest institute in India offering the conservation starting 86, 87. After that, the conservation studies at 2006 from Singer College. They offered, so I got some statistics from them, and which showed that in 16 years, 73 women students undertook conservation studies compared to 42 male students. So it's a ratio of about 64 to 36%. SPA Bhopal, which began in conservation program in 2013. So by 21, it had seen 9 academic years. And 21 is when we, conducted this study, and I got in touch with all our colleagues. I got information from them. So it has been about 9 academic years. And they've trained 110 women architects in conservation compared to 28 male architects in the field of study. So a 80-20 ratio actually. And this is further demonstrated in the master's program, conservation program started at CEPT in 2018. This shows a total of 62 students were inducted over last 4 years, with 47 women students and 15 male students. So 76-24%, So the trend of increasing number of women in the field of, so of course, because they are the role of female gender is in education is higher, makes also they obviously are, in the profession we have more females working in the field of conservation. So that was one aspect of the gender statistics that I wanted to kind of course, we are looking at many other aspects of gender inequality. We have Ananya, who has been working in the field of intangible heritage. So we have a number of case studies. So unfortunately, I've been traveling and I don't have access to show you the actual data regarding that. But there's a lot of data that we have regarding intangible heritage and how heritage and gender equality has been at community level, at various grassroots level, how that heritage and gender equality aspects have been, in India. So there is a very promising trend, and the gender bias is quite, from the earlier, at least in the field of conservation, feel that where India, people are always talking about saving the women child from atrocities and all. At least in the field of conservation, I think it's very promising, and we are moving, we are taking the right steps. So I think that's all I have right now to share. Over to you all. Over to you, Nalini, Lakshmi.
Thank you, Shalini. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. We just have 5 minutes left. I think I can take just one question from the chat box. One question which Monalisa has put. How can architectural practice promote traditional methods and materials? Is a policy level support from government needed in your opinion? I request the panelists, any one of you to respond to this. Would Professor Jigna like to respond to this?
I will. I just have one kind of response to it, that I would not valorize. I would be cautious in valorizing traditional techniques and traditional methods as a blanket, as a blanket go-to place or a go-to discussion, because we are also, Shalini just spoke about SDGs, and many of these traditional techniques and methods are resource intensive in one way or another that the current environmental condition may not support. So I think I just have this thing that I wouldn't, I wouldn't say that there is a blanket uncritical need to go into looking at traditional methods. Though for conservation, it is important, but for architecture, I think innovation, and even for conservation, I think innovation is as much important. I think this is a standard example that many of us take when we are talking about this, is that if we are conserving wooden buildings, we are very much aware that using the same wood, in fact, recently there was a discussion about a laterite building, and in many areas of India, laterite mining is now banned because of the environmental condition of that place. Now, we need to find other ways rather than saying that because laterite was a traditional way of building, we should go back to that. So I think that we need a little more critical view on this discussion, is what my opinion would be on this.
Thank you, Professor Jigna. Anybody from the panel would like to respond to this before I hand over the floor to Vishakha to give the vote of thanks? Professor Murthy, you would like to say something about this?
Yes. I think as rightly pointed out by Professor Jigna, that the current conditions that keep existing, especially about the depletion of resources, depletion of natural resources, is also a threat for the profession. So one has to really look at these values, and they need to be assessed. And as the time problems come by. So that is the reason, instead of having a prescriptive and these kind of solutions, responding to situations and times have to be inculcated in our studios. Rather than some kind of a solutions, ready-made medicines are already existing for these diseases of cities, and because these are all human created situations where we are all working. So obviously this real ground touching situation and this knowledge systems approach gives us more strength in realizing these ground conditions and responding to the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Murthy. I don't think we have time to take any more questions, although I know that many of us want to have a good round of discussion on this approach for new education. But I now hand over the floor to Vishakha to give the vote of thanks. Vishakha, are you there?
Yes, very much. Thank you so much, Lakshmi. Jayashri Mishra has asked one question, and I'm really sorry I was a little on and off because of many reasons. But Jayashri, yes, association of the community and the land which is there around the protected site could be a good area of research to begin with. So we can further discuss this. Please feel free to contact me. Thank you all. I do take this opportunity to thank all the speakers and participants for their inputs, experience, and time. The large presence of ICOMOS India official bearers actually is encouraging for a serious engagement. So thank you, Professor Navin, Rima ji, Shalini ji, Professor Suryanarayana, Murthy, and others for actually working with us on this session. A special thanks to Professor Jigna and Professor Sonal. Your insights to experimentation is encouraging, and may you really succeed in your endeavor, because you are going to show some paths where we can lead ourselves to. Rana ji, you are always a guiding lamp. Keep guiding us. Professor Nalini, you have been a driving force for out-of-the-box thinking. Keep inspiring us. Lakshmi, Monalisa, and Arushi, this program was never feasible without you all three, so we acknowledge all your efforts. Thank you one and all for joining. Please do feel free to join Madhu Votri's effort to collate a webinar across India on the intangible heritage. Thank you one and all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you.